Welcome to Small Business CEO TV. My name is Glenn Garnes and I'm your host, and I'm also the founder of Small Business CEO. And this TV show was created to help us tell the stories of entrepreneurs and share those stories with their customers and their colleagues in the communities they serve. So our goal here is to let you get to know the entrepreneur as you get to know their business. And today we have a very special guest. His name is Manfred Smith. He's got an incredible story. We can't tell the whole story today, but we're going to tell as much of it as we can and give you an opportunity to follow up and get the rest of it. Manfred's story starts with being a former public school teacher who created his own private school, the Learning Community International. We're going to come back to that a little bit later, because before we do, we're going to get to know Manfred. So Manfred, thank you very much for joining us on Small Business CEO
Always
TV.
a pleasure, Glenn. Thank you.
Awesome. Now, a little full disclosure here. My son is a proud TLCI student.
And going to be a graduate.
And going to be a graduate this year. And I'm going to tell a little of our story with the experience with TLCI only because I've had that opportunity and it's been an extraordinary one. But before we talk about TLCI, the Learning Community International, we want to talk with you as Manfred Smith. So tell us a little bit about your background. Well, where did it all start for you?
Well, it all started back in Germany when I was, after the war. I grew up in Germany after the war. My playground were bombed out buildings.
Now, this was World War II, just to be clear.
Yeah, I know. I'm old, but not that old.
I was going to say, I want to be clear, because there's been a lot of world wars.
Yeah,
I mean, not a lot of them, but enough of them that we need to distinguish that.
World War II, right. And then somewhere in the middle, like 55, 56, my mother met and married an American soldier. And that's why Manfred Smith isn't exactly a German combination. So we came to America. I lived in Georgia, then Texas, then Alaska. We moved around because of the military, obviously. What's really interesting when you think about where does the learning community come from and the beginning of that, as a child, we played like I said, bombed out buildings. In Georgia, we ran around, I would say, on the railroad tracks. In Alaska, my father would take me to gold panning in the summertime, and I'd find mammoth teeth and things at the dredges, which I still have, right? And my father, he never went past 6th grade. He had a 5th grade education, but you never know it. Because he always talked to me, we always had this conversation about things. He read papers all the time. He was a very well educated person.
He was
self-educated, that's right. And that sort of primed me, my experience and having a father like that, primed me to look at learning different from, let's say, schooling. So if you want to go back far enough, that's sort of how far back we go.
Hold that thought for a minute, if you would. You just made a really important distinction that I think is important. Schooling versus learning.
Right, the two are not necessarily...
Not always the same thing,
right.
and we'll get a little bit into that when we start talking about the model that you've created with TLCI.
Right.
But you did go through some formal schooling, and you did in fact become part of the schooling system at some point in time. We're not quite there yet, so but let's talk a little bit more about Manfred individually. But you have any hobbies or anything that you
you mean back then or now?
Or now,
I've
whatever.
always been a very active learner and very interested in a lot of different kind of things, which is one of the reasons why school tended to be sort of boring for me. And like I said, we were involved in rock clubs. I went down to mines. I mean, I almost died 4 or 5 times. I'm not kidding.
As a kid, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, we almost went down in the Atlantic coming over here. Almost got run over by a train. I was in a cave-in in a mine in Alaska. I almost drowned when I was 7 years old in a river. So I've sort of, at this point, I've sort of made it.
We're really lucky to have this interview,
apparently. You're probably right. I sort of basically I've avoided the Grim Reaper a number of times now. So as you can see, you can always laugh when you're not dead. So, okay, joke. But that's sort of how it all came to be. And so I've also raced motorcycles and cars. I've done things like that too.
Wow, I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, so a lot of high risk activities, which brings us to the point of the very high risk activity of me going into schools. Now, I was never in. The idea of somebody told me when I was 18, 19 years old I was going to be a teacher, I would have laughed at them. No way, no how, right? Now I went to college, and they threw me out of college. Are we surprised?
Okay. You have that rebel spirit about you at all times.
Yes, I do. I'm very individualistic in that sense. I'm very cooperative, but I go my own way, always have. And so I was out of college, and I met my wife-to-be at that time, and I was at her house one day, and she was in education. And October, she handed me a book. Said, Manfred, you might want to take a look at this. You might like this. It was a book called Summerhill, A Radical Approach to Education. I read that book and said, I could do this. This sounds interesting. So I went back to college. At that point, I had no more problems of being flunking out, throwing out, or whatever. Did very well.
Probably because you had a purpose for being
That
there
is
at
exactly correct. And keep that in mind. You have a purpose. And this is very important when you're talking about what we do in the Learning Committee and why so many students have so much problems in schools, besides the distractions and all the nonsense that goes on. Is really, and in college too, and why so many kids drop out of college and never finish college, is because many of them don't have a real sense of purpose. I can attest to that because I had that same issue there for a while. So I began, I went back, and I actually wound up teaching in the same school. I was hired to teach in the same school I attended, which was the Cornwall Park Junior High at the time.
Wow.
Okay, sort of welcome back kind of. My version, right? Now that was a very insane school. I mean, back then it was the beginning of the '70s, anti-war movement. I came off the streets. I was a very big anti-war movement activist, actually. And I was going to change the schools. Well, that took me many years of beating my head against the walls to realize, no, I can't change the schools. So what I need to do is I can only affect change in my own classroom. So I began to really focus of what I could do to really change what happens in the classroom, what I do in the students. And because the school has such a high turnover rate, if you kept your kids in class, they left you alone. And of course, they left me alone. So I was able to do a lot of really innovative things over the years. Many just things that people, when I tell people I did these things, they just can't believe I did this.
Give us an example.
Well, when we wanted to learn about Paleolithic period, the early period of time, right? So I decided I was going to do a project. We had a woods behind the creek behind the school. So I said, well, you know what? Why don't we take students out, literally, and we actually make stone tools. We actually look at and find plants that could be edible. So this turned out to be a week-long project. So I took, these were 8th graders, mind you. Mm-hmm. I'm the only one out there with them. We're running amok in the woods there, and we are literally teaching kids to smash stones and make blades and things like this. And then we read about it back in the classroom. And we'd make fire. We'd have them learn how to make fire using stone wooden tools, things like this. And we did this for year after year after year. That's just one example of a project.
You teach them how to embrace their inner caveman.
Oh, that too. But because, kids were highly motivated. I generally rarely ever had a problem with students because I always addressed their particular needs. We didn't follow, but if a child had a problem doing something one way, then do it this way instead. So I never had a problem of, no, you have to do it like this, and you have to turn this thing, and testing and things like this. I never really followed a lot of that protocol. In fact, I never opened the curriculum in the 33 years I taught.
So in other words, the Board of Education developed and approved and mandated curriculum was not part of your curriculum in the school system.
The objectives are, I'm still hired to teach in the schools. So I have to, in the way it worked is, you have to address the objectives, but not teach the stuff that's necessary in the curriculum.
Gotcha.
So the objectives were addressed in a very innovative, different way. Another very quick example is a thing called dictatorship. And this is the way I worked in the classroom. We had a discussion one day about totalitarian societies and slavery and things like this. And we talked about, Nazi Germany and the Bolshevik Russia and the totalitarian, authoritarian things. And, kids, they start saying things, oh, wow, I would never go along with that kind of nonsense, So I said, oh, really? I said, how would you like to do a dictatorship? I'll be the dictator, and you all can try to revolt. Of course, everybody's very excited about this, So if we did a dictatorship for an entire week, I had my own little uniform on. We made rules. For instance, students had to sit like this on a desk. You could not move. If you were called upon, you had to get up, stand up. The rules like this, but they could revolt if they succeeded. They didn't. And I had a list. If you followed my directions, you got an A. That's it. You got an A. If you didn't get up fast enough, if you gave me an answer I didn't like, if you looked like you were trying to revolt against me, F.
Wow.
For a whole week.
How did that go?
Very well. And now, of course, at the end, we had to debrief everybody because I got news for you. Within one day, I had 150 Bolsheviks, or Nazis,
Following
or brown
the-
shirts,
yeah,
or whatever you want to
drinking the
call
Kool-Aid.
them. Right, all right, or Antifa these days, exactly, because they fall really quickly into that role.
So hold that thought for just a minute, because I didn't realize that this was going to become an education. This was supposed to be getting to know you. But
All right, sorry.
So you literally allowed the children to experience the curriculum, not just follow it.
Not only experience the curriculum or just follow it, actually help create it.
Wow.
Because what did I do? They had students make some comments about, disparaging remarks about how they would never go along with this. So I said, let's see about that. So we created this experience called a dictatorship. And afterwards, of course, we did a whole debriefing and wrote about it. And it's very interesting because, I was not, as far as the, the supervisors in the county of history and so on were concerned, I was very low on their totem list, obviously, because, they come in there and they see me do stuff and they're just shaking their heads. Right?
You know what, though? But you were being effective, and so they couldn't attack you because you were getting results, and they had to leave you alone.
Basically, that's sort of the idea. But the same person that would criticize me or was very unhappy with me came the day after the dictatorship was over. And of course, I had kids debrief and write about the experience of what they've learned. And they stood there and they read these things. And the person was just, the supervisor could not believe it. And he actually said to me, this is the finest thinking articles I've ever heard students say.
So you turned them from adversary to advocate.
Yeah, at that point, they couldn't bless me directly, but they basically
kind of winked
understood.
and left you alone.
That's correct. And I think that's one of the things when you talk about, how do we get to where we are? And, we haven't even got to the part about what happened before we even got to the learning community.
Let's talk about that. Would you like to talk about the learning community now, or
sure.
I think that based on what you described, the transition seems pretty natural.
Well, the transition actually went from 1977. I read an article by a man called, educator called John Holt, and it says, "Teach your own." Now, I just had a daughter being born, and by '78, I wrote to John Holt, who started publishing a magazine called Growing Without Schooling. So I wrote to John, and we started communicating back and forth. By the end of '78, '79, I formed the Maryland Home Education Association. I'm a public school teacher forming a home education. It's the first in the country.
The genesis of homeschooling in Maryland.
That's correct. And then, of course, eventually what happened was, by 1980, a pastor called, I think, wow, it's been a while now, but we had a pastor who was teaching his children in the basement. And he was attacked, criticized and disparaging remarks by like the Post and some of the writers. So I decided to go public. So I wrote a whole letter to the editors as the head of the Maryland Home Education Association, as a public school teacher. And of course, when that just hit the news, at that point, I was asked to come on interviews, something like this. Articles were written, people came and interviewed me because they couldn't believe a public school teacher was educating one's own children at home.
Wow, that had to be revolutionary for them.
Yes, and also you talk about pressure. After the TV interviews that happened, and I went back to work the next day, I'm going to school, and you literally see teachers in groups in the hallway talking. They see me come in, they sort of stop talking. I'm thinking, they're going to lynch me. There's a lynch party, but they didn't. And interestingly enough, teachers eventually began to come up to me and say, you know what, you're right, I'm going to do that with my kids.
Wow. So you covered a lot of territory.
Yeah,
there. Let me just make sure people didn't miss the full chronology.
Right.
You were a public school teacher
For about 10 years then.
who was instrumental in the legislation that resulted in homeschooling in the state of Maryland becoming legal. You were the advocate or the activist for homeschooling in the state of Maryland.
Oh yeah, and that was we supported and protected parents and supported the right to do that. Just like and of course when you think about it, you asked a question back then in terms of alternative where you send your children. Did you know, even today I believe, that principals and administrators of schools send their children to private schools more than any other group?
That's a well-kept secret.
That's right. So, the parents have the right to educate their children pursuant to their own values, pursuant to what they believe is best for their children, right? Now, for many kids, public school is the right place. And if you're lucky, they'll have a teacher that, or teachers that are good, and there are many really good teachers. We're never knocking teachers. You know, I mean, I was attacked, personally attacked. Home educators were, parents were attacked like a bunch of peasants. You don't know what you're doing, you know. So we fought back, and we pointed that out. And in fact, I always, every time the teachers union, the representatives, not the teachers union representatives, open their mouth, they helped us. Every time they opened their mouth, made disparaging remarks about parents and whatnot.
For one thing, it drew attention to it and made the parents stop and think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Who's paying your salary here? Does that sound familiar? Deplorables?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, it is what it is.
But it is what it is, you see. But it's this constant tendency to disparage people for making a choice or choices that they make. And if there's anything un-American, that certainly is.
So let's talk a little bit. I want to summarize here, and I want to move into the understanding or the introduction and understanding of what TLCI is all about, because what you've really created with TLCI, the Learning Community International, is an opportunity for students to basically customize their learning experience consistent with the academic subjects that are important to know and in life generally, but to basically decide what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, and how to craft it to play to their strengths so that they actually maintain interest in it. You are a fusion between private school, because you are an accredited private school, we'll talk about that in a minute, but you have a homeschool flavor that allows for every student to have their own customized learning experience. So let's start there.
Yes, because you know we have advisors that work directly with students and the parents. I mean, it's not just students; it's also the parents have to be involved, or the academic advisors. Depends upon the relationships anywhere in the globe.
But you've got flexibility there too.
Yes, we
in
do.
terms of how active the parent is, how active
That's
the
correct.
academic advisor is.
That's right.
That can all be customized as well.
Absolutely, because our focus is really on the learner, the success of that particular learner, and we're not interested necessarily when we enroll students. We enroll the students based upon, and the family based upon whether they really want and understand and want that kind of flexibility in program. I mean, right now, a parent can go online and there's 50 online programs I can choose from. Now, from my experience, essentially they're all school in a box or on a screen.
Different flavors of the traditional academic environment.
Exactly. We are not. We have curriculums, we have a variety of them, but that's not what we do. What we do, I mean, we do literally customize based upon students' strength, their needs, their interests, because our goal is to have students become more self-aware, really our mission actually is to empower students to reach their highest potential. That is our mission. That's been my personal mission as a teacher all my life, and that's what we do. So we do that through providing the support, the resources, the flexibility with the accountability to really help that student to achieve their particular goals or to get them where they would like to go. Whether that's working when they leave high school, working at McDonald's, working, whether that's going to the military or the Ivy League schools, or just a regular 4-year college or a 2-year college. Whatever is the most successful route for them to go, that is how we help them, shape them.
And I will tell you, Manfred, that was one of the things that was attractive to us as a family about TLCI, is it wasn't just about preparing someone for another 4 years of college or another 4 years at an Ivy League school. It was about preparing them for whatever they chose to be their learning experience going forward. Can I share my own story?
Please.
And I don't want this interview to become about me, but let me just reinforce what you just said. My son, Nolan, very bright student, very bright young man, was not experiencing a favorable result in the traditional learning center, and then in the traditional learning environment. In 7th grade, he was flunking out of, he was not excelling. By the time he got to 8th grade, he was so bored with what was going on that he was starting to become a little bit rebellious. Not in a disruptive way, but just not be willing to be a participant in the process.
Very typical.
We removed him from the traditional learning environment and enrolled him at TLCI. And his entire attitude changed. It took a little while because he still saw it as school, but when he found out that he was going to be able to take a weekend blacksmithing class where someone was going to teach him how to create a forge and let him create whatever he wanted, all of a sudden he started to become a little bit more interested in what was going on. Fast forward to today, because the story could take a year or two by itself. He's graduating a year early from high school with a diploma, a transcript, and is getting an A in his English class that he's taking at community college as a junior in high school currently. And so his entire attitude, his entire approach has turned around. He's had a chance to experience things that never would have been possible in the traditional school system. Nothing against the traditional school system, just wasn't right for my child. But my point is that he's now going to be taking an entire year just to decide and explore and figure out what he wants his life to be about. It's not an entire year off from college.
No.
It's an entire year off to decide what he wants to do next.
Right.
It may end up becoming college. It may end up becoming something completely different, but it's going to be up to him and on his terms. And that all started with the empowerment that came from him having to participate actively in his curriculum, in his solution, in what he wanted to study, how he wanted to study, and what he expected to learn from it. He built a computer from scratch that he now, that's where he does his homework now. I mean, literally from scratch. That was his project.
Exactly.
He ended up mentoring another student as part of this program on how to build his own computer because of his experience with it. So he's learned so many different things that never would have been part of the traditional learning experience, that he's much more ready for life than most kids that would graduate from college at the same time he's graduating from high school a year early.
Yeah, our entire program is based upon an empowerment process, which is self-reflection, self-evaluation, self-correction. And I'm not talking about high school. I'm talking about kindergarten.
Say that again.
Self-reflection,
right.
Self-evaluation of what's happening, what's going on in their life, what's in a particular program, a particular study, and self-correction. Because that's how you get empowered individuals. You get empowered individuals because they become increasingly self-aware through our process of the advisors working with you, asking these kind of questions. Well, wait a minute. Explain to me, you're doing this, it's not working. Why isn't it working? Well, why are you doing it? What's your alternative? How would you do it differently? So we expect our students and our parents too, our family, to step up. This isn't, oh, okay, hey, so go ahead, make me do some stuff. This is not what we do. In fact, that's why we have a pretty extensive pre-enrollment process. I mean, you go to any other kind of program online, enroll, pay your money, and start using the thing. We don't do that because we're not interested. This may sound funny as a business person also. We're not interested in enrolling students. We're interested in finding the right student and family who understand or can appreciate what we are, what our mission is, and see that as a real opportunity for their child and for themselves. Because a lot of times the advisors actually working to help guide the parent.
Right.
Sometimes more so than the student.
I can tell you that my wife and I have both learned as much as Nolan has by going through this process with him together. I mean, it's an amazing how much reflection we've done on our own experience and relationship with Nolan. I mean, it's like getting to know your child all over again.
I was about to ask you, as a parent with a child in this kind of environment, do you feel and believe after these number of years that you actually have a closer relationship with your son, or?
No question, it's been a closer relationship, and I'm so tuned in now to the things that he's interested in that every time I come across something, I'm sending it to him. Where some parents, they don't even know what their kids are interested in because they come home from school and they don't talk about, what was your, oh, it was fine.
Yeah.
How was your day? Oh, it was good.
Good.
But what does good mean? Well, nothing happened major.
Right.
But we are actually actively participating in his learning experience. And frankly, I've learned a few things. But
that was the same situation. Even though I've always been a very active learner, when I had my own children, all my 3 children were also educated through this process, all the way through high school, from beginning to end. And that's one of the things I found immediately myself as a parent. To be actively involved with the child's learning means that guess who learns even more than the children do?
The parents,
right.
And you as an academic advisor.
That's right. And things you would never, I cannot tell you how many parents over the years have told me that this is the greatest thing that ever happened because for the first time they began to love learning. because their experience in school often doesn't correlate to really enjoying
That was our
learning.
exact experience. You just summarized exactly what our learning experience was. We went from having a child that hated the idea of even getting up to go to school in the morning to one that's like excited to go to community college. He's going to a special session early next week to prepare for his final exam. That's something he's never done before, and he's looking forward to it. He can't stop talking about it.
But when you think about entrepreneurs, and that's sort of the mindset of an entrepreneur is really a person that's willing to take risks and take the action to fulfill those, right? We've had a number of students over the years who are entrepreneurs. I mean, I remember some years back, early 2000 something, we had a young man enrolled with us, 15 years old. At 15, he was running a lawn service at 15. He was making more money at 15 than I was teaching for 30 years.
Okay, so let's be clear. He wasn't just cutting neighbors' grass.
No,
he was running a lawn service.
He was running a lawn service. Now you think, well, how did he get anywhere? No, he had people working for him that did the driving. When he was 16, he bought a truck. We've had students. For instance, our youngest graduate is 12, a 12-year-old who graduated from Towson at 14 and went to medical school at 16.
Amazing.
Right. That's one end. Then we have kids, for instance, who graduated at 19, 20, 21 because they needed more time. Eventually began to explore more in terms of what they wanted to do, and now happen to be medical doctors. But they graduated at 19 and 20.
But they took their time and they did it their way, and they got to the same destination.
That's correct. Because our goal is the success for the individual, and usually when success also is combined with doing something you really want to do, you love to do, and it makes you happy. And happiness is a really important. I mean, how many people have jobs? Are they happy?
You know the answer to that.
Yes,
I know the answer to that.
Right.
And you know the answer to that. But on that note, let's do this, because I listen, we can have this conversation for a long time, and we will, because we'll invite you back to come and talk some more. But you also have a podcast for TLCI Radio.
Yes.
We're going to let people know how they can get that. Right. But let's pull up on the board how people can get connected to TLCI. It's tlcischool.org. And I'm telling you right now, I know I sound like a commercial, and I apologize for that if it sounds that way, but I'm just a believer in this whole process. I would strongly encourage you, if you're looking for an alternative way for your children to experience education as opposed to suffer through it, I'd encourage you to go to tlcischool.org and set up a discovery conference with the executive director, Nancy DeLuca Stemple, so that you can at least become educated on what the possibilities might be for your student. I think that you'll be very, very pleasantly surprised to see that there are some real life options that prepare your children not just for academics, but for real life. And that's the important thing about the TLCI experience. It's not just an academic experience, it's a life experience. I think you used to use the tagline, "The world is your classroom," and that's what you're talking about. You went out in the back in the woods, and you didn't have them read about tools created by the Paleolithic. They did them themselves, which gives you a whole different appreciation for how that might happen. So. Go over to tlcischool.org. If you're watching this video from Manfred's personal profile, get connected to Manfred. Get some questions answered. I mean, even if you don't have a child to enroll in school, you should get to know him just because of what he knows and who he knows. But if you are watching this video from somewhere other than Manfred's personal profile on Small Business CEO, go to sbceo.com, www.sbceo.com, and get connected to him. All of his contact information is on the profile, and you'll be able to find ways to have a dialogue with him. Now, we're not done with the interview, but we're going to need to quickly wrap up because we spent some good time, and I enjoyed this, and I appreciate your coming on and sharing. But one of the things I wanted to know is two things. Number one, what is something that most people don't know about Manfred Smith? I hope I'm not catching you off guard with that.
Not at all. Well, there's a lot of things, but how about just this one? I'm a novelist. I've written about 8 novels. I'm working on another one, fiction. Whatever inspires me, something I've been doing the last 4 or 5 years. Never thought that's another thing, by the way. When I went to school, you get your paper back, the proverbial, she cut her wrist and bled all over my paper with the red everywhere, English teachers. And here I am. I'm the one. Of course, I've written a lot of material after that. But I learned in school that I could not write very well. That's what I learned in school. So I'm. Of course, I don't publish it under my name as a nom de plume. But nonetheless, they're out there. So.
But if someone had told you at the age of 18 that you had been a novelist, you would have laughed them up and down the street.
Well, I probably would have said, I don't believe that. But that shows you. I mean, the real issue here is, and one of the sad things I see is when people sort of they think, well, I'm 30, 40, 50 years, they don't pick up books. It's life. The joy of living is to be really a lifelong learner. And that's really what the learning community is all about. That's why it's called the learning community, and I would really encourage, everyone listening out there to think about really being more engaged in their children. And of course, what you do with a small business CEO, I mean, that's really, everything you do is really about really encouraging people to go out there and look and change their lives and be more involved, And so the work you do is just phenomenal. And it's been a blessing for us to get to know you and to have you in our lives too.
Well, we've very much been peas in a pod from the beginning, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be able to tell your story, because your story for children is what we do at Small Business CEO for entrepreneurs.
That's right.
We're letting
and for
people
our kids
experience.
Too, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Our kids can use all
That's right. Some of your students have been participants
right.
in mentorship with us here, and some of our professionals,
That's
and
right.
experiencing some of the things from the world of entrepreneurship. So, and we're gonna be looking very much forward to continuing that partnership as well. But one thing I want to highlight as we wrap up, because we are running out of time, is that one of the things that you've done recently, and I'll just share this myself, is that this year you stepped up into some new technologies that make the learning experience even more robust than it has been in previous years by taking and creating a communication system where parents, academic advisors, tutors, and mentors can all interact with kids online and with each other online to create an even more communal feel to the entire learning experience. And you have the ability to deliver information, courses, all kinds of information that help to enhance the parents' ability and the students' ability to really be selective in crafting that custom learning experience that TLCI is known for.
That's
and
correct.
so I'm really excited to see what's going to happen. I know that this is just being implemented.
Yes.
The next class is going to be the ones to be the first beneficiaries of the new
fall.
system, the fall of 2018 class. And I just can't wait to see how, I know what technology does for us and what it does for our ability to deliver value. And I can't wait to see how the students interact with that, because I know that their entire lives are about to change for the better in terms of being able to craft that custom learning experience that they're looking for.
Yeah, we're very excited about that, primarily because our entire flexible program, customized program, doesn't fit into a box. And this is not a box, this is just a space. And where things you can collect things and keep them together, and have conversations, and whereas the flexibility and the actual customization continues outside of this space also. So it doesn't.
I would describe it as the rocket fuel that powers the ability to be individual in their approach to education.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. It's going to make a big boost for us and really help to keep things really well coordinated and in one place.
Fantastic.
Which is really important.
Well, it looks like students around the world have much to look forward to if they explore the TLCI learning experience, and I certainly encourage you to do that. Well, Manfred, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been fantastic. And I know that our time is short, but I think we've covered a lot of territory in the time that we did have together. So,
well, thank you.
On behalf of Manfred Smith, the founder and the principal director of the Learning Community International, the School Without Walls, my name is Glenn Garnes. I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of Small Business CEO TV.